Okay, lovely. So anyway, really over the last 5 or 6 years, a lot of my work has been specifically in fire doors, particularly as spokesperson for the Fire Door Safety Week campaign. This campaign brought me into all sorts of stakeholders who interact with this product and really taking on a lot of their views. As we move into the presentation, I'm really going to place people front and centre of our fire door decisions, and it's a theme that I'm going to be coming back to over and over again. Now, just before I move on, I feel it's really important to give a shout out for ASFP. Again, a trade association that I've worked with over the years very, very closely. I pulled out this very old photo of them from a few years ago. Now, I just wanted to kind of highlight and really say thank you to ASFP for the opportunity of coming here to present on their behalf as well. Okay, and before we actually start talking about fire doors, I'd just like to draw you to another subject which is also really close to my heart, the Children's Burns Trust. So the Children's Burns Trust is a charity that specifically works in 3 key areas. Prevention of these awful accidents from even happening in the first place, so really the education side of things. Very much the rehabilitation of these kind of accidents. Now, if you can imagine a young child who suffers a burn injury, so a burn survivor, they may need to have multiple very, very painful surgeries over their life as they grow, and the Children's Burns Trust really goes a long way to supporting not just the burn survivor, but actually their families, their siblings and their caregivers as well. And then that bigger one, that support. You know, these accidents, they can be just a moment in time, a few seconds with your eye taken off the ball, but actually can lead to a lifetime of support that's required. So again, this charity does some really, really important things. If anybody has got the time to just go and check out their website, you know, to give your time or to give a donation is really, really precious to this charity. Anyway, moving on. So first, I'd like to just start off with what's the big deal about fire doors. Now, I expect that the people who are in my audience today, you guys probably get fire doors, so I'm not going to labour that point too much, but I do want to share some of my experiences from the big, wide, outside world, where I'm interacting with stakeholders about these products all day long. And even nearly 5 years after Grenfell Tower, I'm still surprised at the reaction that I get, the lack of attention that these products get. I'm going to take you on a really short walk through fire door history, and again, that could be a presentation, a 3-hour presentation in itself. There are many, many teachable moments as we look back over fire door history, and ones that we really should take the time to reflect upon, because I think it drives us forward to how this industry future-proofs itself going forward. I'm going to talk about the system of components and always coming back to that system, and not just thinking about the product, but the installation, the maintenance, and everything that's going to maintain that system through its life service. I'm going to come very, very quickly back with a walk through primary test evidence, third-party certification, and traceability. And we're actually going to go backwards in that process. I'm going to start at the installed product in a building, and we're going to walk all the way back to the original testing of that product. And then just a quick reflection from me at the end, and I hope that this leads into a lively Q&A session. So I see a few colleagues in the audience. I'm sure that I can rely on them for some questions, but please feel free to ask any question. There are no silly questions here, but just a few reflections about what might the future hold. What are the things that this industry can do absolutely now to make sure that they are prepared for the future? Okay, so at Masonite, we manufacture thousands of doors, all different shapes, all different styles, all different colours. Hello, Neil, by the way. Thank you for distracting me there. But I just wanted to kind of come back, because lots of people say to me, Hannah, it's just a door, right? What's the big deal? You're talking about doors yet again and again. But I just want to highlight that these elements of our construction, they are so dense in meaning. They are, in fact, interwoven with our everyday lives. So there are a few interesting door facts I'm not going to bore you with on the right-hand side of the screen there. But really, I want to pull back to some of these semiotic, these philosophical meanings behind doors. So think about it, and think about all of the symbols that a door can display, the meanings that it can give. For instance, communication. A door slammed in your face means completely opposite to an open door policy. Reflect that back to fire doors as well in that sense. Think about doors as giving symbols of status, of security, of safety. And of course, identity. If I walk up my street where I live, I look at all of the different front doors. Often the people that live within those buildings, they're trying to show their sense of their own self-identity. Now, when we start thinking about identity and all of these things, safety, hearing the door close at night and knowing that the kids have got home safe, all of those things, they really build this thing which is much deeper, much bigger than all of that, this concept called home. So as I say, I just wanted to bring a little bit of reflection about actually how doors are so important to us. A quick show of hands in the audience, please, so don't be shy, but how many of you have touched a fire door this morning? Very good, so excellent. Now, did all of you have a good look at that fire door and make sure that it was closing properly? Did you have a good look at the gaps? Did you have a look at the traceability? We've got one, okay, a few people after my own heart then. No, really nice to hear. But again, these are products, as I say, they should be absolutely at the top of our minds. Pretty much every building that we go to, we visit, we sleep, where we've dropped the kids off this morning, they will contain fire doors of one shape and size. So really we're interacting with these all day long. Okie dokie. So moving on to this point about what's the big deal. So I walk through fire doors every day. I obviously take a very close look at them. And oftentimes I find that they're wedged open, left open, broken, can't shut, wouldn't be there to stand firm in an emergency. And I just want to kind of highlight a few things. So a few basics, which I guess everybody in the audience probably knows. So compartmentation, it's a simple theory to delay the spread of fire, smoke and toxic gases around the building. So essentially buying those critical minutes and sometimes critical seconds even. So we want to do that for many, many reasons. We might have a building where we need to protect the occupants. We might need to protect the building fabric. We want to keep a protected route out of the building in case we have to evacuate. But of course, that same protected route out of the building is, of course, the protected route into the building for the emergency services who often we expect to run into a building when the rest of us would be running out of it. So in many emergency scenarios, fire doors actually become one of the first lines of defence. But a really, really important point, obviously you can tell I'm completely obsessed by fire doors, but I just want to make the point that fire doors are indeed part of the overall passive fire protection system within a building. You can't rely on one element to be the holy grail, the silver bullet that is going to keep you safe. And just one small point, of course, they won't work if they're not closed. I'd just like to draw your attention to this image on the side of the slide there. Now, there was an awful fire on the 4th of January this year in New York in a high-rise block with many fatalities, many of them children. This image is quite powerful because it actually shows a chimney type effect that happened in that building. Now, very, very early reports, early investigations of this fire are suggesting that some key fire doors or a key fire door relatively low down in the building was indeed left open, allowing the smoke toxic gases to travel up that main stairwell. And so bringing back to this concept of the fire door actually playing a very critical role within that overall passive fire protection, think about passive fire protection as layers of protection in your building, so safety nets as it were. And the way that we mitigate risk is that we build up multiple safety nets. So if one fails, the next one will take over. If that fails, the next one will take over. But think of a fire door in terms of maybe a high-rise block of residential flats. There are actually many different fire doors within that building. We'll have cross-corridor doors, stairwell doors, flat front doors, probably doors within internal apartments. And actually each one of those doors, it needs to do a different thing depending on where it is, depending on the risk profile, depending on who's interacting with it. So again, when you think about these things as layers of protection, as soon as one of those layers starts to break down, we actually see a deterioration of the overall fire strategy in the building. So really, really important point. And when I'm thinking about fire doors, I do often come back to this poem. For the want of something so small like a door shutting, it can actually be on occasion the difference between an absolute disaster and something that people can walk away from and said, we were lucky there. Okay, so just moving on. Now on the next slide, of course, I've got a video. Now everyone, if you'd cross your fingers please, because we want to make sure this is going to work. But oh, perfect. So I just want to touch upon the scale of the problem as I see it. So before my role that I currently do now, manufacturing, designing, testing fire doors, I worked in the trade association world. I worked for the Fire Door Safety Week national campaign. And I spent an enormous amount of time investigating fire door safety in different types of buildings, so hospitals, healthcare, education, schools, residential, private residential, social residential. And I was coming up across problems that I was absolutely speechless about, the poor levels of fire door safety that are maintained in some buildings. So I'd just like to be quite reflective here and actually bring you back to a visit that I did only last week. So I'm visiting a big building, a tall building, a building that's got many, many different occupants and different requirements in that building. And I'm looking at fire doors that seriously had not been looked at for 25 years. Now, I may have made a mistake there by calling them fire doors, because frankly, I don't know. Until there's no traceability, there was nothing to suggest that these things really are fire doors. So how do we really know? And I've got to ask myself, again, nearly 5 years after Grenfell Tower fire, how can that still be the case? So I just want to sort of just bring us back that actually this is a major problem in many, many different building types. It can affect many different people, and we should be very cautious of that as we go forward. Okay, so people front and centre, as I said. Really important moments in fire door history. Now, I pull out a few really that I have known of which have been critical and sometimes actually overlooked for how important these events were in relation to fire door safety. But in reality, do you know what? I'm listing hundreds, if not thousands of events which either went undocumented, uninvestigated properly, and the critical learnings from those events have been lost. So just a warning here, guys, be very, very careful and take heed of some of that past history that we've got with fire doors. There are big lessons to be learned from, here's a range of incidents which happened, but I just want to bring back again, people front and centre. We need to be considering this in every fire door decision that we make going onwards, because that is indeed what I'm showing you here, the real human cost of getting it wrong. Okay, just a nice photo of me there having some fun burning some doors, which is my other favourite activity to do. Okay, so we're going to move on now and start to talk about this as a system of components. Now, I hear all too often someone ring me up with a technical question and they're talking about one specific component of my system, maybe the hinges, maybe the letter plate, and their focus is too siloed. It's thinking about these components in isolated manners. Now, a lot that my experience in testing has really taught me is you need to be thinking of this thing overall. It is a chain of safety. If you get one weak link in there, that's where the whole system is going to break down. Now again, I'm not going to read my way through this slide and point out to you all of the different bits of a fire door, because frankly you'll be bored to tears, and so will I. But really, just to kind of bring across some of the very complex fire door sets that we're making, they may contain hundreds of different components by the time I've counted every screw. Now again, bring it back even down to those tiny details, the fixings, the gaps. These are all critically important. So when I hear someone just saying to me, Hannah, calm down, it's just a door, all of a sudden I'm like, whoa, no, we need to be thinking about these completely different. Let's think about them as highly engineered, safety critical products. Okie dokie. So again, I'm not going to read my way through all this entire list, because I'm sure that there are some people in the audience who will remind me that I've probably forgotten a few off that list. But a few that I really wanted to kind of bring back to with this concept of the system of components is these ones down towards the end. Lineal gap seal and fixings. So actually, how are we going to secure this into a building? What passive fire protection are we going to use to seal that gap? How are we going to make sure that it's entirely safe? How are we going to plan and manage that installation? Again, a lot of the conversations that we're having with our stakeholders, they're happening much, much earlier, and it's something that I can only encourage. I would much rather turn up on site with every problem, every question answered, rather than turn up, take a door out, and all of a sudden find that you've got an issue that you can't deal with on site. So again, the planning, the conversation, the due diligence of documentation, this should all be done before you roll up on site. And then just thinking, of course, about those ongoing maintenance cycles. I can go in and install a door, it can be 100% brilliant, I can walk away from it, and if it gets misused or not looked after, not maintained, all of a sudden I've got a problem, that a product that is eroded, it's not going to be fit for purpose when the time comes. Now, all of that stuff that I've talked about, that counts for nothing unless, of course, I've got traceability. Now, I'm going to show you an example of traceability, probably important for me just to highlight that there are many, many different certification schemes, many different ways of providing traceability in this fire door landscape. I'm going to show you an example which is familiar to me, but as I say, there are other examples out there which I expect many of you will be familiar with as well. So let's just pull down to this point of traceability. The image that I'm showing you here is a fire door label. Quick show of hands, how many of you have actually come across one of these fire door labels or something similar maybe? So that's cool, because actually, you know what, 5 years ago when I was doing these kind of presentations, actually the numbers of people putting up their hands I could have counted them on one hand. So, you know, education and awareness, we are moving forward with this. Now, and this is where it becomes very, very useful to stakeholders who have to legally manage fire door responsibilities. Okay, sorry, I'm just going to stop for a quick drink, if I may. Okay. So on this slide, what I want to do is take you through that walkthrough of traceability. But stick with me, everyone. This is where we're going to work backwards, okay? So we're going to work backwards at the beginning from the installed product, which is on site. Now, if I have taken legal responsibility of a building, or if I'm going off to do a fire door inspection, a fire risk assessment, the first thing that I want to do is to be able to identify what I've got in that building. Now, with no on-product traceability, no methods like fire door registers being kept, those stakeholders who are now assuming that legal responsibility to manage fire door safety within a building, they have got a problem on their hands, because frankly, if you haven't got traceability, how do you even know that it's a fire door? So to lead back, we expect some kind of on-product traceability, maybe by a label, maybe by a sticker. I also expect to see things like fire door registers being maintained in a building. A fire door register is really important. It can not just tell you which door set exactly you've got fitted in a particular location, but you can use that fire door register to keep documenting what you do to that fire door. So for instance, every time I come round and do an inspection on it, I would document it, I would photograph it, and I would pull it back to this fire door register, because essentially that's one of my golden threads. That's one of my evidence trails that I would be picking up to be able to demonstrate that I am managing these things responsibly. So from this fire door label, really, really useful bits of information. Okay, it tells who the manufacturer was, so someone could pick up the phone if they've got a technical question and they might get through to me. But really, there's more important things that this label carries. It carries a unique sequential number, so that's that one isolated door set that we're talking about. We're not talking about groups of door sets. So again, that sequential number, really useful if you're thinking about managing these things via a fire door register in a building where you've got all of these things listed. The other key bit of information that it gives me is actually the certificate. Now, in the example that I'm showing you, these certificates are available to go and download. They come as two parts, the certificate and the data sheet, and they contain all sorts of information about maximum limitations, sizes, configurations, the type of ironmongery that you might fit with it, the type of intumescent protection that you might fit. And those documents, they also include lots of information about installation, lineal gap seals and such like. So I'd really encourage you, given that these documents, they are publicly available, to, we won't go through the detail now, but you know, a bit of bedtime reading there. These are some pretty interesting documents to get your heads around. They contain a lot of detail, and if you're working in the fire door world, they're very, very useful to be very familiar with as well. And then after that certification, I just want to bring back to this other point, primary test evidence. So quick show of hands, how many of you are hearing this term primary test evidence quite often? I'd say I'm hearing it once or twice a day maybe at the moment. Now, I realise this is an emerging conversation. I have a lot of stakeholders who are saying, Hannah, yeah, we appreciate you've got the certification, but we want to take it back a stage further. We want to see that raw evidence. Now, this lovely image here of us burning a lot of door sets, there's some important things to take from this. Primary test evidence is literally me rolling up at the test centre one day and having a successful burn. It's a snapshot in time, it's a snapshot of performance. So what really is there to help me be able to go back to my factory and manufacture a product in the consistent, repeatable fashion so that I can achieve the same performance when I go and test it again. So for stakeholders out there that are only looking for primary test evidence, number one, be very cautious. These documents can be very, very complex to get your teeth around, so they do require the time, the due diligence to go through, and you do need to understand what you're looking at as well. But equally, my guidance is to look at these documents hand in hand with the certification, because the certification is leading back to the audited trail, the factory production control system that I'm going to talk about in a minute, and these are what leads up those layers of assurance that we talk about for our stakeholders. The traceability, for instance, just as an example that I've just shown you as that example, that is also one of the facets of third-party certification. So think about primary test evidence. It's good. It's just a snapshot of performance on that day. It's not showing that you can do it repeatably unless you go and burn lots and lots of doors. I'm quite lucky that I'm able to do that, and given that's one of my all-time favourite activities, that works well for me. But as I say, this certification bit is very, very important and not to be forgotten. So we think about primary test evidence, and as you can see from this very, very brief image, this is a lot of fire tests that we've done, and you can sort of pick up, sorry for the quality of it, but all different styles, all different sizes, open in, open out, so bi-directional testing, some with glazed top lights, glazed screens. I know that my colleague next is going to really get into the subject of glass and glazed apertures as well. But again, this point that primary test evidence, it is just a snapshot of that test, and it's really the collation of that primary test evidence that then leads into the third-party certificate, the certificate which is showing you the limitations, the extent of what you can go onto the market with based on your primary test evidence. But I just want to take it back one step further and show you something that maybe the rest of the fire door industry doesn't readily see. For every test that we go and we go and test at a UCAS accredited test lab and all the rest of it, there's much work that happens behind the scenes before we even get to do that test. And part of it is this witness test specimen. So, I could make a door, let's call it a lab queen, one that's been specially engineered to go and pass the test. But that's not the point of what I'm doing. The part of this activity where you have an independent witnesser come in, look at how you're making things, check your factory and your control system to see that you could indeed go back and manufacture these in a consistent fashion, is such an important part of the puzzle. So at the moment, when I've got stakeholders who are just asking for primary test evidence, I'm quite keen to say, yeah, and another good facet to check out on this is that actually that primary test evidence has come from independently witnessed samples to start with. Okay. So I told you that I would talk about factory production control system, and maybe for some of you, you'll think, oh God, why is she going off in this direction? But within Masonite, we manufacture literally thousands of fire doors every day, and we need to have the strictest of factory production control systems from the very, very beginning, where we're bringing in our components and our raw materials, through every production process, and then through the final checks and actually even the shipping to site. Now, I wanted to kind of show you this photo to give you an idea of scale, but I also wanted to really bring you to this beautiful map which I kindly drew up. Now, for some of you who may be involved in manufacture, you'll recognise this as a production flow. But what I wanted to get over to you with this is that every coloured box that you're seeing on this production flow, it's involving a specific operation. So for instance, just because I know it, that box there is, for instance, fitting an eye viewer within a fire door. Now, if you think about it, each one of those stages of process and production, they've got tens, hundreds of checks underneath them. So really each one of those boxes is, by the time we've worked our way through and we have a product that we're ready to ship to our customers here, I've built up this history of all of the dates, the traceability, the documentation, the checks that we've done, the photography that we've taken of our product, the evidence that we've captured. And what am I doing? I'm capturing it in a digital golden thread. Now, I'm talking about here just our factory digital golden thread. thread, but all of you in the audience, I expect, will be familiar with the wider concept of a digital golden thread to support safety critical products. And again, this is some of the work that we are doing to actually contribute to that digital golden thread going forward. So I can't really emphasize enough how important that factory production control system is to my clients, to make sure that we can in fact go and repeatedly manufacture our product with a control specification. So just before we finish, and oh no, we are actually doing okay for time. There's a first. But I just wanted to sort of bring this other point, thinking about multiple performance characteristics of a fire door. So I've talked about fire doors all morning, but in actual fact, maybe I should be referring to these things as door sets with fire capabilities, fire performance characteristics, as well as a load of other performance characteristics. So again, consider this holistic approach. Now, when I first was doing this slide, I had it typed up in a nice little list for you. I thought, wait a second, no, a list is suggesting that I have some kind of hierarchical preference over one performance characteristic over another. In reality, for people that are managing fire doors, again, you'll recognise with some of the doors in your buildings, you are going to have this combination of some pretty different performance characteristics. So it's important that I'm not just looking at things from the perspective of fire, even splitting that down, integrity and insulation. What is the need? What is the requirement that I have within my building? But equally, I should be considering facets like environment, security, durability, safety and use, all of these other lovely things that I have listed here. And I can't really think about any one of those performance characteristics in preference over another. So again, just a kind of slight caution there to think of it with this holistic approach. Okay, so just moving on, and I hope that this will lead into some questions from the audience or even comments as well. This is a bit of my personal reflection, so again, I'm really pleased to be challenged on this, of course. But what might the future hold? So in every fire door conversation I'm having, whether it's internally in our organisation with my own colleagues, whether it's externally, whether it's with occupants of buildings, stakeholders, the emergency services, I am placing, or I am trying to place, people absolutely front and centre of every conversation I have. We are in a world, a rapidly changing world, one that is where technology is playing such a massive role. Humans and technology don't go together, but let's think about this. If we put the people front and centre, we can indeed design systems that are going to deliver the value, are going to deliver safety. So again, just with every conversation that you're having, when you're thinking about specification, even managing an installation, think about all of those different stakeholders that actually that product will interact with over its life, and really give them some credence of thought. I've spoken about technology and big data and all of that kind of thing. No expert on that, so I'll leave that one there. But also talking about these long-range fire door plans. If I think about the fire door industry maybe 6 to 10 years ago, it was like, oh, I'm just going to roll off down to the merchant and go and get a fire door because I need one right here, right now. This long-range fire door plan, as I say, it's about having the foresight to manage these products throughout their lifetime, which in some cases can be 10 or 20 years. It's about having the foresight to properly plan refurbishment installation programs, asking all of those difficult questions before you get on site to make sure that in actual fact you can manage these things in a very, very smooth and of course a competent fashion. And really throughout the industry and throughout the fire safety industry, I'm expecting and I'm really hoping for a greater level of transparency. But with that transparency comes the need for education. I gave you the example where I'm being asked for primary test evidence reports, left, right and centre. I've had my colleagues and my stakeholders openly admit to me that they don't know how to scrutinise these. So let's not overlook that. And again, there is education to be done within the wider sector. And really just sort of a personal comment from me at the end, I hope that all of this, it does lead to a greater level of fire safety. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.